I'm starting.
Where were you at today?
What was that today? Old.
Yeah, it's not Chris.
He comes to what's important. Sick.
Oh, for cryo.
Bro?
Yeah. If he was over there eating, he'd be like, no, I'm to Babson.
No. That's because he doesn't want to have to sit there and take care of his nephew.
He said he's going to work.
Think he's gonna work?
The other nephew.
Oh.
You know, Cookie has brothers.
Right there.
Where are you going?
All right. Gotta send, since we're about to start reading about Israel, I might as well shoot out a text to Israel on here.
Wait, that camera recording?
Maybe.
It's live. It's a record.
I was debating getting back on the bad couch,
I'm not
There's
getting
no one
it.
there, is there?
Oh,
No, no one there.
but it's still scary.
I'll also minimize that so no one can see that there's no one there.
That's the.
Well, man, why you want to be next to me? Look at the camera.
So?
I don't want to be the camera.
Trust me, no one wants you to carry it. All right. Leviticus. Leviticus. Obviously the most exciting book in the Bible. Highlighter.
Yeah, I was gonna sit there right on that bed.
Wait, so is that my water? Did I
Yes,
bring my water?
yeah, you start highlighting.
I think I did.
Oh,
No, the other one.
Never.
Underneath.
let me see that one. Sis. No, let me-
Never.
You should start marking out that Bible.
Oh, that was
Where's Leviticus?
thing.
After Exodus, third book of the Bible.
Oh, okay.
Here, Victor. You're gonna need one of these today. Honestly, you're not gonna keep up on a phone today, just because we're jumping so fast. Like it's just you aren't gonna be able to do like they won't switch fast. I did a phone Bible for a year at church, and I eventually ditched it because for one, I realized, yeah, you can type in notes and you can click and say highlight. It's just so hard to do. Like it's still just not that quick. And I like being able to flip open a Bible and just flip, and see all the highlighted stuff all in there. And you can't just jump over here. Like it's one thing to go like on my phone, I can usually get like from Leviticus to John 8:25 faster than people in their paper Bibles because you can just click John 8:25. But if you're talking about Leviticus, we're going to cover chapters 1 through 3. Now flip to chapter 5. Now go to chapter 7. Now go to chapter 9. It's just way easier when you can just turn a page and you're there. So third book of the Bible. The third book of Moses. We're finishing up the books of Moses tonight. So first 5 books of the Bible, Moses compiled them. He did not write everything, but he wrote most of what's in Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. The very end of Deuteronomy is a scribe.
You touch those, you eat them now.
What it is them.
All right. So here's the deal.
That's up to you.
With brown sugar.
It's okay.
And
You don't have to eat them. Terms. All you want.
Hard.
All right.
He's like we should have said next to it.
We've got a lot of book to cover. So realistically, I'm just going down and looking at this up. So Leviticus chapters 1 through 5. And we said we're trying to do 3 books today. And I'm going to, a lot of Leviticus, we're going to jump through. But here's a storyline. The Jews got out of Egypt. Last week we did Exodus, right? Let my people go to Pharaoh, 10 plagues, they cross the Red Sea. This is where things take off. Now, what's interesting is, as someone points out, it took 40 hours to get the Jews out of Egypt. It took 40 years to get Egypt out of the Jews. We're going to find in Numbers, really Leviticus is like a pause. We got the law. Moses went up on the mountain, got the 10 commandments. Leviticus is now like a pause in time, and they just basically recount all of the laws. There's no real storyline at all in Leviticus. It is pretty much just all the telling of all the laws. Numbers tells their time during the 40 years where they're stuck in the wilderness. Then Deuteronomy is actually like Leviticus all over again. Because what it is Leviticus was the telling of the law, like Moses went up and talked to God, got it all. He came down and explained it to the people. That's Leviticus. They mess up in Numbers, get stuck in the wilderness for 40 years. Then in Deuteronomy, a whole new generation of people are there. The idea was everyone 20 and older died in the wilderness. And so 40 years later, those people who are 19, they're now 59. All of them have kids and yada, yada, yada. Deuteronomy is the retelling of the law. Whole new generation of people, so they just say it again, and then it's them heading off into the promised land. Then it switches, the next book is Joshua, where Joshua takes over, and they go start conquering. So chapters 1 through 5 are just talking about different kinds of offerings that they offer. Some offerings they were required to give. Some offerings were voluntary. Like you could give a sin offering when you were sinning and you needed to go and do it on your own. It wasn't like this one happened on this day at this certain time. Others were like free will offerings. You would just come and give it because you wanted to give it. So that's chapters 1 through 5. 6 and 7, more information about offerings. We're going to move kind of quick through some of these things. 8 and 9, it talks about Moses, his brother Aaron. He was the one when he went down to Egypt. Moses is like, I'm not a good speaker. God's like, your brother Aaron he'll be the spokesman. He'll be the one who does all the talking for you. Aaron became the high priest. So like the highest priest of their order was Aaron, Moses' brother. So chapters 8 and 9 talks about what ceremonies they have to do to make Aaron the high priest. So that's 2 more chapters done. And again, I'll say, like I said last time, I've got my Haley's Bible Handbook. It's a great, great buy for any new Christian who just wants help understanding the Bible because it just has broken down chapters. My Bible doesn't have headings like I think Anthony's Bible might. No, it doesn't. This Bible here, which I was using the other week, has all like the sections broken down so that like like I think your Bible probably does. So like every section's titled. So I'm just using this to kind of remind me I don't have a lot of highlights in here because a lot of it's just sacrificial stuff. There's things I've marked though, like in Leviticus 10. Again, it's just talking about sacrifices and stuff. But I highlighted a quote from Exodus. So it's Leviticus, they're quoting Exodus. So, but those who come near me, God speaking, I must regard as holy. And before all the people, I must be glorified. It's talking about how only certain people in this system they had were supposed to go before God. Now it starts getting into that, like Jubilee said. No, it gets into now here's the laws, all the weird Levitical laws. So when you talk about Jewish people, they don't eat pork. They don't do this. They don't do that. That's called Levitical law. So these are not the 10 Commandments. These were laws for Jews. I know Anthony's brought up questions in the past. I think Josue has. I think Victor has. Like some of the guys we've sat and talked with over the last year or more. What about tattoos? What about this? Piercings? What about that? There's a lot of stuff that's in Levitical law that some people might argue like, oh, Christians, we're supposed to do these things. But a lot of that stuff, if it's Levitical law, it's not something that's like a forever thing. I have in my notes, Levitical law had 3 purposes. One was the culture, one was health, and one was just overall behaviors. God gave them a lot of rules. One of the biggest things he was trying to do was have them not be like the other people. There were people doing wicked, wicked things. God's like, I don't want you to be like them. These people are getting tattoos, but for them, it's part of their satanic pagan worship. They were getting crazy tattoos for their gods. Back then, if you got a tattoo, that was the only reason. No one got the little, Miho on their chest, just like a picture of their son. Like, no one did that. No one got a Bible verse on their arm. No one got a little butterfly on their back, and then they have a couple kids. It turns into a dragon. Right? Like,
no.
it's just the fact that, people didn't do that back then. You only got tattoos if you were worshiping pagan gods. So that's why God just said, don't do it at all. So this is it. I don't think it applies to today like it used to. And you can go into the whole stuff. We're not under the law. But some of the things we're going in here is like purification of a woman after childbirth. Laws concerning leprosy. I'm going here into chapter 13. Here's an interesting thought about leprosy. This is just something to chew on. Leprosy at the time, that's me, was an incurable disease. There was no way to cure leprosy, yet God gave them a procedure of what to do when someone's been cured of leprosy. And when Jesus showed up on the scene, he cured people of leprosy. And he said, go to the temple, show them you're cured, like it says in Leviticus 13, and do your offering you're supposed to give when a leper gets healed. It's just fascinating that it's like, yeah, here's God giving provisions for the healing of leprosy. What's interesting, and I don't have this memorized, but if I did, it'd be really cool. A guy was talking about, what's funny is there's all this stuff that is in the Bible. What's also amazing is what's not in the Bible. The New Testament and the historian Josephus tell us that Moses was trained in all the ways of Egypt. He was like Pharaoh's second in command. He was potentially the heir to the kingdom of Egypt. And they raised him up in the temple just like they taught him. They went to school. He did all that stuff, right? Well, if you find ancient documents of like what Egyptians believed as medicinal, there was all this crazy stuff, like something about like the dung of some animal. If you put that in your hair, it'll help baldness. Not trying it. But, optimistic. But like this guy I was listening to gave this huge list of like crazy, like, oh yeah, if you've got arthritis, you just need to take, squeeze the juice out of some cheese and rub that on your arms, and then like these just weird, like I mean, you guys have all heard of like native different cultures have got their weird like
Mexicans
how do you
drink Sprite?
that's no Sprite, they'll cure anything, right?
Yeah, exactly.
No, we've got the Sprite downstairs. I do the Sprite. Sprite's okay if you're the Vaporub, put it in your head, put it in your socks.
Everywhere.
I thought the Sprite one was true.
The Sprite does help your stomach sound, but
they made me eat it at the hospital.
how much they give you, But either way, what's interesting is the Bible has none of that. Like all these things that Moses would have been taught his whole life in Egypt, it didn't make it into the Bible. But the stuff that does make it in the Bible stands ahead of science typically. It's still old school and rudimentary, but like when we talked about circumcision, if you missed that day, what a great day to miss. It was talking though about how God in the Old Testament, these are thousands of years old documents. God commands that children get circumcised on the 8th day they're alive. Day 8. That's the Jewish tradition that Jews today are circumcised on the 8th day. Well, why the 8th day? Well, it's just tradition. Well, science later, only in the last 100 years, you find that babies are not born with the stuff in their bodies to coagulate blood, for blood to turn into a scab. If you cut a baby, the baby will bleed out. And the baby can just keep bleeding because they don't have the stuff in their body yet to heal cuts. I'll check on him in a second. We'll find out if he needs me to heal his cuts. Here's the interesting thing is the vitamins, and nowadays they give a baby a shot. Like you ever know, if you've seen a baby born, like right as they're born, like boom, 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 they blast the baby with a bunch of shots. Vitamin K jump starts that system and gets it rolling. On a normal baby with no shots, on day 6, it's like the system's like 30 or 40% operational. On day 7, the system is about 70% operational. On day 8, the system's like 120 to 150% operational, which our bodies will do. When we're low on something, we ramp up whatever's needed, whatever hormones are needed to make it work. And so on day 8, a baby's ability for blood to turn into a scab and heal itself jumps up to super high, 150%. So it's way easier than normal. And then by day 9, it drops back to about 100%. God said circumcise the children on the 8th day. So the science and the medical stuff that is in the Bible, it's kind of crazy how it lasts out. So either way, though, go. Okay.
That was so
I told him he can't leave his bedroom for like almost anything. That's like the one thing he can leave for.
Did you say cuckoo?
Poo-poo. Which means I may need to step out for a second. Anthony will have to teach on Canaanite abominations. But that's chapter 19. I don't know. All right, 15. Uncleanliness. Just more laws about stuff. Buddy, when you're all done, you need to tell me. All right. Judah, go potty.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, she hit the curb.
Yeah.
She was going, she gassed it, reversed it. I was like, where did that person is? I hit my car. Next thing you know, boom, it hit the curb. And then she kept on going. She kept on going, and then I think the second one hit the curb.
All right.
No.
Judah, are you gonna go potty?
So funny.
No.
Then go back to your bedroom,
I
right?
don't want to.
No, it's all good. I'm right here all sweating.
Bedroom, go.
Oh, we
Shut the
can
door.
Curve like
It's Savannah. Shut the door. Go, 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 go. Go.
You don't even know something.
Who's that right
He's still
here?
giving the stories.
Who's
I'm
that
gonna have to
black
have
chair?
a sway.
Who's
I'll
on
show you where
that
to
black
dispense this
chair?
way. You can go.
Who's on that black chair?
Judah, I need you to go in your room, buddy.
Who's on the black chair?
Papa Bear,
No, who's on this black chair?
Savannah,
No one.
and Maritza.
Oh, it's okay.
All right, here we go. Chapter 16 is important. This is where they give the rules for the Day of Atonement. Yom Kippur. Big celebration. This is the day that the Jews would have their sins paid for. This is the only day of the entire year the priest was allowed to go into the holy place, or known as the Holy of Holies, where the ark was, inside the tabernacle. I didn't get one lined up, but I definitely should get a picture of the tabernacle for you guys. Because what's cool is the tabernacle, we skipped a lot of boring chapters where they talk about how many rings, metal, like you do a shower curtain, you have rings that hold the curtain. There's curtains in the tabernacle. How many rings? How far apart are they? What are the rings made of? What's the diameter of the rings? It's all listed. Why? Because the temple was a more permanent version built almost exactly the same. And why? Well, God says it's because in heaven there's going to be a temple. And they wanted our earthly one to be symbolic of that. And everything has a reason. If you get a really good teacher, yeah, there you go. Feed that kid. You'll find out that those all have meanings. Why is this? Why is that? We're going to look a bit later about like one material and why do they make it that certain material. Why do they use that material to build with? And what kind of symbolism is in that? But this Day of Atonement is very special. Here's an interesting thought. Jews today, they're very confused people. I'm not trying to pick on them. But here's the thing is that the Day of Atonement was the day their sins were paid for. Exodus is a great place to quote, without the shedding of blood, there can be no forgiveness of sins. That will forever be true. From the beginning of time till the end of time, without the shedding of blood, there can be no forgiveness of sins. What are we banking on?
Jesus.
The death on the cross.
Huh?
His,
Well, yeah, it's Jesus dying on the cross. It's faith in him. And it's his blood. John, behold the Lamb of God who comes to take away the sins of the world. That's how John the Baptist, his cousin, introduces him. See, everyone's cousins in the Bible too. It's just like random. And so the thing is, though, is that back in the Old Testament, the shedding of blood, these animals was a covering. It was like you're kind of paying a temporary payment to bank on the later one that's coming.
I went poop in my
I saw that kind of coming. Go in your room. Go in your room.
They changed me.
I will. This is what you get for telling me you can't go to the bathroom. Really has to go back. All right, so the only second part of this is they would do two things. One would get slain, and that was the one for payment. The other one was an interesting one where they would take their hand, put it on this goat, the scapegoat. If you learn about scapegoats in English class, that's where I learned that word. It was English 10. And they would essentially, the idea was symbolic of putting the sins on that goat, and they would shoo it off, and they'd make sure people would drive the goat out into the wilderness. The idea was the sins of Israel were placed on that animal. It was a symbolic thing, and they knew it. They knew it wasn't real. But symbolically, and it was driven far, far away. And it was supposed to be symbolic when that one goat died to pay for their sins were driven far, far away. There's a lot of cool symbolism in that stuff. And then if you go to the, yeah, I just figured what I'll do is Anthony can teach on Leviticus 18. Anthony's good. You guys listen to Anthony. I actually think the Lord's put a message on his heart in Leviticus 18, so I'll guarantee it.
You just start, bro.
You guys just want to hear me read it? Or what?
You put it on your heart.
I was just reading
Sexual immorality.
Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, I am the Lord your God, according to the doings of the land of Egypt. where ye dwell, you shall not do, and according to the doings of the land of Canaan, where I bring you, you shall not do. Nor shall you walk in their ordinance, you shall observe my judgments and keep my ordinance to walk in them. I am the Lord your God. You shall therefore keep my statutes and my judgments, which if a man does, he shall live by them. I am the Lord. None of you shall approach anyone who is near of kin to him, will uncover his nakedness. I am the Lord. The nakedness of your father or the nakedness of your mother you shall not uncover. She is your mother. You shall not uncover her nakedness. The nakedness of your father's wife you shall not uncover. It is your father's nakedness. The nakedness of your sister, the daughter of your father, or the daughter of your mother, whether born at home or elsewhere, their nakedness you shall not uncover. Let me see what it means.
Dude, get the bottle, dude.
I know, she's the one that look.
She like goes
Look like
deeper and
she's
deeper
tired.
every
I can't
time.
have one hand in the Bible and then one hand on her.
It says in the bottom of my Bible, it says why like what?
Well, read it, say
I read
comments.
Read it.
Sexual sin was accepted practice in Egypt and Canaan, but here God completely forbids it. So that's why.
So that's
So yeah.
Don't do that.
So let me get that right. Sexual incest, they said? Is that what
Yeah.
I said? Okay.
Like it's
Yeah.
mom and your son, your mom. and stuff.
Keep it coming, Anthony. You're good.
What the? I'm so random.
I don't know where I left off.
8.
What verse did I do?
11.
6.
No.
The nakedness of your father's wife, daughter, begun by your father. She is your sister. You shall not uncover nakedness. You shall not uncover.
Hey, bro, hey.
is that in Spanish? Oh, no.
How's
Now
it
he's
going?
back.
Oh, he's
Let's
back.
talk about it. Here.
Oh.
You can find this. It's not hard to find.
I'll find it. Yeah. What were we talking about?
About sexual.
Incest.
Yeah.
Incest. Nakedness.
How's that going for you?
It's a little weird.
So I'll just throw this out here. This is sexual sin, sexual morality. That's all covered in this chapter. Verse 22 is worth noting. That is you shall not lie with a male as with a woman. That's one of the verses in the Old Testament speaking on homosexuality. There's also verses in here talking about sleeping with animals, with relatives, with all sorts of things. It's all sexual sin. And we talked about this on Sunday at my church where, Paul in Romans is accusing the people of being hypocrites. And we talked about how that's something the church really struggles with, is hypocrisy. Because the church gets this image of these people who are very anti-gay, yet Christians, my big quotation marks there, are living with their boyfriends and girlfriends and sleeping together, and then they're getting mad at gay people for their sexual immorality. It's like, no, it's extremely hypocritical, and it looks horrible. The answer isn't to just start saying everything's okay because there's hypocrisy. The answer is just stop being hypocrites. It's to just practice what you preach. Do it, Don't just be speakers of the word, but be doers of the word. All that said, there's some more miscellaneous laws. You will see verse 15 of chapter 19, you shall not be partial to the poor, nor honor the person of the mighty. It's part of God's attitude you'll see throughout the Bible. Don't be a big buddy to the rich guy, and don't be picking on poor people. He's not partial to anyone. That's, again, Romans 2, where I was on Sunday. God shows no partiality. He doesn't have one person that he disfavors more than others. That certain groups of people are any better than any other group of people. There is no such thing as races except for the human race. Chapter 19, verse 18, the latter part, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. That is Mark 12:31, when Jesus is asked, what's the greatest commandments? Well, he's going to quote Deuteronomy, which we're going to get to later. But then the second thing he says, the second commandment is to love your neighbor as yourself. Pretty straightforward. Just love people. Verse 28 is the no tattoo marks. Throwing it out there. We said it's Levitical law. It's in there, though, but now you know where it's at if you want to make reference. Chapter 20 kind of continues on. There's some stuff that kind of goes back, and it speaks again on some of those laws. Chapter 20, verse 24. The last part of that verse, it says, I am the Lord your God who has separated you from the peoples. That was his whole intent with a lot of those laws. He's trying to make them separate, not like every other person. They're supposed to be different. The Old King James in the New Testament refers to Christians as being peculiar people. Newer versions call it special. But peculiar kind of liked it actually better. We're not just special. We're like, no, we're peculiar. Christians should be weird. They should be different than everyone else on the street. Because they should not do some of the things other people do. And they should be doing a lot of things that other people do. Chapter 21, rules about the priests. One thing I have highlighted in my Bible. 21 verse 10, the very last part of the verse, it says, the priest should not uncover his head nor tear his clothes. A rule for the priests. They're not supposed to tear their clothes. It was like a big thing back then. People went all Hulk Hogan when they got angry. They would just take their shirts and tear them, right? This,
Hulk Hogan.
that was like one of his signature moves, you know? You knew it was real deal. He said, here, Steve's still drinking more. Go back down.
She like smacked the bottle.
Go. She might be ready to lay down soon. Okay, so if you did write in your Bibles, as I encourage any of you with your own Bibles to do, where it says, nor tear his clothes, you can make a reference to Matthew 26:65. That is where Jesus, as he stands trial, makes the high priest angry because he basically calls himself God, and the high priest goes and rips his clothes open, breaking the law. It's Matthew 26, verse 65.
Hey, she doesn't want
Okay. You know what? You want to wrap her up in this and just lay her down in her room? She might cry for a little bit, but she'll probably calm down. She didn't get very good naps today. Okay. So really quick, going through the rest of Leviticus. Chapter 22, more about the priests. Leviticus 23. Here's where things get exciting for a second. All right. So we've kind of every week had something, one of these crazy Bible math, Bible weird things that's just kind of like you'd be surprised on how it all kind of comes together. Who knows what that means?
She's like, I'm done already. What is that? Oh, like, what is it?
Let's go. In her bed? Or
Crib. Put her in the crib, my room.
Yeah,
Here we go.
What is that? It's in the bottom. And then
Chapter 23 Leviticus starts talking about the feasts. This is one where we could easily spend the night just talking about the Jewish feasts. Because what's so beautiful about the feasts is they all are symbolic of something. And this is why in 1 Corinthians 10, when they told us not to be ignorant about Old Testament typology, about how the Old Testament is full of symbolism that comes true in the New Testament. This is the kind of stuff that blows your mind. I don't want to go through all the feasts, but Cameron's pastor and my old peer and friend, Billy Wheeler, pastor of Calvary Chapel, Everett, Washington, he did a message on the feast, and I loved it. And only part of it got recorded. I remember wanting to keep a copy because he did such a good job of just going feast by feast, talking about what it meant. The Passover feast, where they celebrate the spotless lamb, that when the blood was shed of that lamb, it covered their household and death passed over them. I mean, there's all these things in symbolism. There's a symbolism of the Feast of Booths. It's where they go and they build these tents where they can look up at the sky. The intent of that whole celebration is that they're supposed to live in a temporary dwelling place that's not very nice, and they're going to long to be back in their permanent dwelling place. Creating the spirit of like, I'm in a temporary tent, and Paul calls our bodies tents. He was a tent maker.
how many feasts were there?
So I wrote down some stuff here. Here's an interesting fact now. Let's look real quick at, I'm going to answer that as I kind of go into this. Leviticus 23, verse 4. These are the feasts of the Lord, holy convocations, which you shall proclaim at their appointed times. There are 70 Bible number 7, it's completeness, it's perfection, the Bible. 70, it's 7 times 10, right? There are 52 Sabbaths in a year. That's an appointed time. Every Friday night to Saturday night, sundown to sundown, is a Sabbath where the Jews would do nothing and just spend time focusing on God. There were 2 7-day-long feasts. Passover was one of them. The Feast of the Unleavened Bread, where Passover was a part of that 7-day celebration. There were 4 one-day celebrations, like Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. We were kind of talking about the Lamb. That's one of those, a one-day appointed thing. These were on specific days of the year. He says, like, it's not, it's like at this day of the year on this day. For instance, the Passover, the 14th of Nisan. So now Nisan, they base that off of moons, which is why Easter is not the same day every year. Because Easter is 3 days after the Passover. Jesus was resurrected those 3 days later, 17th of Nisan. We also commented in Genesis how it was the ark came to rest on the 17th of Nisan. So when the ark came to rest, that was the same day as when Jesus was risen from the tomb. And when they got to come, and too much cool symbolism. But putting this all back, I said there's 70 days. Now, there's a study in the Bible for nerds, so I love it, where they talk about numerology, Bible numbers. I don't know how many of you guys remember when I talked about how if you take the book of Genesis and you go in 49 number jumps, 7 times 7. 49 number jumps, starting in the beginning of Genesis in a Hebrew Bible, right? It has to be Hebrew. Language was written in. It spells Torah. That's what the Jews call the first 5 books. It's the Torah. In Hebrew, that's what they call it. So you go to Exodus, the first letter, go every 49 letters. It spells Torah. Leviticus, it doesn't. Numbers, every 49 letters, it spells Torah backwards. And Deuteronomy, the last book of the Torah, it spells Torah backwards. So for you guys, I guess, actually, no, for you guys, it's right, because they read right to left. So actually, when I read left to right, it's right for you. Torah, 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 Torah. When you do it this way, it spells Yahweh. When you do Leviticus, the name of God, and how the whole thing points to the name of God. That's numerology, where you study these weird number games. Certain chapters, you jump at certain letters, weird things happen. Here's an interesting fact. The book of Genesis, which is where a lot of these things play out, because it is the book of beginnings. It is a key book in the Bible. We did it in 2 nights. It's the only book we're going to cover in 2 nights. When we're doing our Old Testament run-through, like Exodus got 1 whole night, but no other book's going to get 2 nights. And Genesis deserves 30 nights of Genesis. But we did it in that amount of time. That said, there are 78,064 letters in the book of Genesis, individual Jewish letters. That said, just an interesting thought, not including 1, right? The phrase appointed times. These are the appointed times. The times when we do things. If you looked at 2-letter jumps, or 3-letter jumps, or 4-letter jumps, or 5-letter jumps, or 6, any number other than 1, where you'd actually just be reading it, right? Statistically, out of 78,000 plus letters, it should appear 5 times in the book of Genesis. There's actually some statistics where it's like, it's not crazy to find words if you jump every few letters, right? It's like when you have 78,000 words and a guy dying on the floor, you assume that okay.
Yeah.
You would assume though that you'd run into it a few times. So statistically, doing every combination, you would run into the phrase appointed times. I have it in my Bible. I almost all memorized. Ha-moyadim. Yeah, ha-moyadim, the appointed time. Appointed times. But actually, instead of appearing 5 times, how much times does it appear?
25.
25?
500.
500?
Repeat the question. I'll space enough.
So, if you just jump numbers, whether in 3s, 4s, every 5, it should statistically show up at least 5 times. How much time does it show up in Genesis?
7 or 49.
You'd think, right?
77.
Only once.
Oh.
It's only 1 time in all of Genesis does that, which is actually more rare because It should show up 5 times. It only shows up once. Here's the catcher. The word starts at the beginning of Genesis 1:14. That is where the word appointed times comes at an interval of 70s. There are 70 appointed times in the Jewish calendar. If you jump by 70, starting with the first letter of the first word of Genesis 1:14, you'll get the phrase appointed times. Genesis 1:14. Then God said, let there be lights in the firmament of heaven to divide the day from the night, and to let them be signs for seasons, for days, and for years. So that's the verse where it goes, where God talks about, like, their appointed times are based off of moons and things like that. So just kind of an interesting fact. These are the weird things in the Bible where, dude, it is just so full of them. And you could spend years studying this stuff. And I like the point, though. Does this stuff change our lives at all? It shouldn't. I mean, we can't. I'm not going to behave different because of this. It doesn't tell me how to love people. It doesn't tell me how to fight sin and temptations and struggles in my life, how to overcome huge things like family suffering, friends suffering, personal suffering. But it does show that there is an author to the Bible. And it's not many authors, there's one author of the entire Bible who've used many different people as tools throughout time. It speaks of the significance of the Bible. All that said, I'm just kind of going really fast. Really cool. Chapter 25 is the year of Jubilee, my daughter's name. I'm just trying to go a little quicker. Talks about the Goel, the kinsman redeemer, the guy who could redeem land in the year of Jubilee. The idea of Jubilee was this. We wonder why families today don't know their Bibles, have trouble with church. On those Sabbath days, you would stay home, not work, but you would sit around as a family and talk about God. Dad would lead, and Dad would teach the family the Bible. And Dad would know his Bible really well because every 7 years was a Sabbath year where you took the entire year off work and sat around the house and taught your family the Bible.
You want to do that?
That's what they did. If you have faith, God might provide. That was the thing. God said, yeah, in year 6, I'm going to give you guys such a big harvest, such big everything, you can sit around. If you guys have faith to go ahead and do it. Don't plant your crops in year 7. I'll take care of you. Well, you'll find really quick off the bat, they stopped doing it. They started working all year long and doing all 7 years. But this was the intent. And every 49 years would come in the 50th year. After the 49, the 7 sevens will be a year of Jubilee. This would be a second year off you can take. 2 years off, sit around and learn your Bible with your family. Think about the impact this would have on families. If they just sat around with each other as a family, mom and dad and kids, sitting together, talking about their faith, what they believe, why they believe, going through it all. It was the year of Jubilee, though, which is everything in Jewish Israeli land was on lease. Whatever's in the Delgado household would forever be part of the Delgado household. If Victor sold stuff to Anthony because Victor needed the cash, that's great. But you see, the year of Jubilee, Victor gets it back, no matter what. So that's why you didn't sell houses for hundreds of thousands. Anthony goes, all right, year of Jubilee's in 3 years. I'll give you this much. Versus year of Jubilee's in 40 years. I'll pay a whole lot more for that because you're leasing it for 40 years. Slaves went free. Debts were all paid off. You could not hold a debt past that year. If you loaned someone money and they didn't pay you back before Jubilee, it's done. All that said, the year of Jubilee gets paired up with Pentecost, where 7 times 7 weeks after the Passover, they have this Feast of Pentecost. And you actually see these interesting ties between Christ and his coming and the year of Jubilee and the celebration of Pentecost, which is when he ascended, and at Pentecost is when the Holy Spirit came down. So, all that said, I'm going to skip over a really cool story in chapter 26. I'm just saying.
Don't say it.
Oh, yeah, barely any time. Okay, like 26 verse 8, 5 of you shall chase 100, and 100 of you shall put 10,000 to flight. God has continued to protect Israel. He said, I'm going to kick Israel out of Israel. And that happened. He said, I'm going to disperse you among the nations. That happened. He said, they're going to hate you more than any other people. That happened. And then he says, I'm going to bring you guys home. And that happened 2,000 years later. That's unheard of throughout the history of the earth. That doesn't happen. And the fact of the matter is, he's protected them since then. When they got their freedom, a good movie that I do own, it's an old movie, but it's very historical to learn. It's called Exodus. Paul Newman's in it. He plays Doc off the movie Cars. He is the voice of Doc. Paul Newman, you guys might remember. He's did some classic movies. But he's old. Well, Newman's salad dressing. With the guy's face on it on the salad dressing bottle. That's Paul Newman. He has his own like salad dressing line. Anyway, it's movie Exodus about the Jews getting back Israel. Is what the story's about. Very cool story. And let's just say this. The day they got they're a nation. They have no army yet, right? It's the first day. Like, you guys get to have Israel. Woohoo! All the surrounding Arab nations attack. And the Israelis, armed with nothing, defended themselves and kept their country. Continually, the surrounding nations have attacked Israel. And they continue to attack Israel to this day. Israel's the big bad guys because they did get support from other nations. Why? Okay, Billy Graham, famous preacher for anyone who went to see Woodlawn in the theaters. He was the preacher with the candle at the end and everything like that. He said, if God does not judge America, he's going to have to forgive Sodom and Gomorrah. For those who are here for Sodom and Gomorrah, he burned those cities down because of how immoral they were. He's like, yeah, they don't. Some people ask, why has God even allowed America to be so successful? Up until very recently, because recent administrations, not to point fingers.
Obama.
You said it, not me. No,
Like
we've always supported Israel. And the Bible says, those who bless you, I will bless. And those who curse you, I will curse. And there are nations that have cursed Israel, like Egypt, who was the world power, who today is a third world country. Germany did have a very strong economy in place. It's not that big anymore. I mean, Germany's still a big place, it's still a first world country. But people who have blessed Israel have been blessed historically. And who have cursed Israel have been cursed. The Russians oppressed Israel. Russia's never been that great of a place. The people who have welcomed Israel, the Jews in, like America, America flourished. All that said, God's always protected them. They get picked on now when someone lobs, we hear about, like, all day long, people from other countries shoot missiles into Israel. I'll be there in a week. I'll try. When my parents were there, it was the first time a rocket had landed in Jerusalem, like, forever, because they have their Iron Dome. They have super cool technology where they can spot missiles. They can tell if the missile's going to hit them or hit somewhere else because they're horribly bad aim. It's just kind of like hitting bottle rockets in your hand and trying to hit someone a block down. You just kind of shoot it that direction and see if it lands. But they can sense with their radars if things are going to hit. If they are going to hit, they shoot off missiles that go up and take out the missile in the air. Cool stuff. But one hit, my parents got out, my mom and my brother got out in the last plane before they closed down the airport. Backtracking. There was a war called the Yom Kippur War. There was a 7-day war. These are cool wars to learn about because Israel kept growing their territory because people kept attacking them. Like, this is Israel. We're good with this. And then Egypt attacked. So they chased Egypt. And then when they fought Egypt into Egypt-controlled territory, they said, we're keeping this. And that's actually, like, there's, like, worldwide rules to war that are actually accepted. And one of them is, yeah, if you defend yourself and take territory, you can claim that territory for yourself. So if they attack you and you chase them into their territory ways, you can stop. What they did is they stopped at a strategic military point where there's like a big river and stuff where it's hard to attack them then. And now when people enter negotiations with Israel giving up their land, they're trying to make them give up these strategic military points to where they'd be very vulnerable. All it said, Yom Kippur War, you made me tell this story, Arisa. I wasn't going to tell any of this Israel stuff. I was going to go on by it. Yom Kippur War. General Swiggy or Colonel Swiggy or Captain, I think it was Captain Swiggy. Yom Kippur War. What's Yom Kippur? I've said it a couple times. Yom means day. The day of
salvation.
The day of atonement. Yeah, we talked about that earlier, right? It's the day of the feast. Well, today, because there's no temple, they can't sacrifice anymore. This is where it'll throw Jews off. I forgot to say this earlier. It's like, they can't sacrifice. Without the shed of blood, there's no forgiveness of sins. Tell that to a Jew. So how do you get your sins forgiven? Well, on the day on Yom Kippur, I sit and think about my year, and I think about if I've done more good things or more bad things. That's what they've got. They've got nothing. any real Jew, like seeing Jews in Israel, there's some cool scenes, and I'm excited to see it in person. The Orthodox Jews, the ones who really follow the law to the T these days, you will, any day of the week, you can go to the wall, the last standing wall that was not destroyed of the temples. The outer wall, there's one little section, the Wailing Wall it's called, because you go there, and Jews, grown men, are weeping, and they are screaming with tears because they realize they have no temple, and they cannot sacrifice. It's a big deal over there. All that said, Yom Kippur is a big day. The whole place shuts down. I mean, nothing happens in Israel on Yom Kippur.
Is that when you're going?
Huh?
Is that when you're going?
No. No, Yom Kippur is not when I'm going. That's at a different time of the year. But Yom Kippur is when the Arabs decided to attack. When, like, literally phone lines are shut down. Like, there's no way to communicate on Yom Kippur. Because they're very serious about God's law of, like, everything shuts down for this day. We just focus on the Lord this day. To this day, they still at least do that. Well, they get attacked. And so they're, like, trying to get troops together. There's no way to get anything going. And there's all these stories of, like, troops who said, oh, we saw things. And so we didn't go that way. We did this, we couldn't go. Well, Captain Swiggy was known for, there was something like 100 enemy tanks coming in from this one area. He had one tank, and he was the only guy. And so he would, like, shoot, he would pop up from out of nowhere and shot one of the enemy tanks, and he, like, dove back. And he's like, that's, you know, that's one for Captain Zwiggy's brigade or something like that. And it goes over, and he like drove behind some houses, came up over here, popped up and shot a tank. He's like, Captain Swiggy, we got another one. Like, going back, and he would report to himself. He's just one guy on the radio talking to himself. And so they thought they were facing a whole bunch of troops. And 5 of you shall chase 100, and 100 of you shall chase 1,000. Like, yeah, it's happened a few times in Israel where they've been attacked, and miraculously they've defended themselves with crazy odds. God's always been there for Israel. He always will be, no matter how much he chastens them. Just like I love Judah, but I will chasten him to teach him a lesson. And he will. He's done it before. Kicked them out of their land. Done some things to set them straight. But he never disowns them, just like I'll never disown my son. Verse 33 of chapter 26. I will scatter you among the nations and draw out a sword after you. He's saying, this is what's going to happen if you guys don't listen. If you guys don't obey my laws, that's what's going to happen. Verse 44 of chapter 27. Yet for all that, when they are in the land of their enemies, I will not cast them away, nor will I abhor them, hate them, to utterly destroy them, to break my covenant with them. He's like, I'm never going to break my covenant. I've said I'm going to stick with Israel. I'm going to stick with Israel. So, the book of Numbers. I'm with the whiteboard.
Oh, dang.
Fancy.
I did a whiteboard today. Aren't you guys excited? All right. So, here we go.
Why can't it be a brown board?
North.
Why can't it be a brown board? What? Dude, that's actually
What kind of marker would you use?
a white one.
Brown board? I don't know. Northeast, southwest. I scribbled. Okay, check this out. Numbers. They built the tabernacle. Where does everyone sit? Well, the Jews are very literal. You'll find out, like, when they say, like, I mean, we've told stories before. You'll find out later if you haven't heard them. But, like, the Jews take all their laws super, super literally. When they say give 10% of everything, they, like, get their mint plants. They pick off 10% of the mint plants and give it to the Lord.
What?
You know, they make sure. So here's the deal, though. It says in chapter 1, flip it over. Chapter 2, they're going to tell them how to camp. Here's the tabernacle. The tabernacle, the door opened to the east where the rising sun was at, okay? That's the tabernacle. On the east side of the tabernacle, starts with the forces of Judah. So we got Judah here. And then we've got a bunch of other people with Judah. But Judah's the first tribe. FYI, Judah, they all had flags, and all their flags had like they had their, whatever the symbol was for their tribe, right? Judah had the lion, was the symbol, the Lion of Judah. Hail, hail, Lion of Judah. Good song. Anyway, little Judah, he's named after. Okay? And it says here there's 186,000 people. To the south was Reuben. Reuben was a man. That was actually a man on his flag. And all the people, so there's other tribes there too, but that's the one closest up that kind of heads it off, leads it. There's 151,000 people of all the tribes gathered together. And this is only men. for what it's worth. So there's women and children to be added to this, but they only numbered the men. On the west was Ephraim, and it was an ox that symbolized it. Okay? With him, 108,000. Okay? Now we got Dan. He'd be an eagle, compass. And there was 157,000. Okay? That's it. Everyone cool? All right, moving on.
Show the camera.
Why
You guys want a little more?
don't you get a more
Yeah.
detailed picture?
All right, how about this? 150, right? Let's say this is 100. So that means 50 would be right about there. 151. This is 100, keeping it the same. Add 57, right? Pretty much 150. This is 108. So it's only going to be that plus a tiny bit more. This is 186. So it's going to go like that, and I have to add like pretty much another one to it, right?
Dangerous.
So this is how they stat. This is how they all stood in the desert. And if you're bearing with me on this, this is the shape of how they would camp if you looked at it from the sky. Yes, that's north. But when you look at it going into the temple, it pretty much makes a cross. 108, 151, 157, 186, the big long side at the bottom. They would camp directly because they were supposed to be to the south. They wouldn't get off. They wouldn't wander. They would be directly to one side or the other of that tabernacle. Here's an interesting thing. Here's where the Ark of the Covenant was to be kept. This is where the throne of God was, basically. God would dwell in there, right? Well, surrounding God were these flags of a lion, an eagle, an ox, and a man, right? If you listen to like Isaiah 6, where he talks about his vision of heaven, you have the cherubim or seraphim flying around in heaven. Ezekiel chapter 2.
But when they would go to war, so how many men of each tribe would go?
Everyone.
Everyone?
Oh, yeah. Here's an interesting thought of symbolism, guys. All right, I didn't ask, but can everyone else see what I see in this picture? I'm just throwing it out there, seeing if I was the only one.
What the heck?
I see the bottom one's bigger. Well, because you have to think, it's numbers-wise, it's only 108 up top. It's 186. It's nearing twice as much at the bottom.
Yeah.
Here's the other interesting thing. Ezekiel chapter 1, verse 10. The cherubim, if you read about them, they're weird angels. These are not looking like people. They were creatures with wings, 6 wings, all this stuff, but they had 4 faces. And in Ezekiel, it describes them. In the likeness of their faces, each had the face of a man, had the face of a lion, had the face of an ox, and had the face of an eagle. So here are these creatures that surround God. They fly around God's throne. This is what they look like. Eagle, ox, man, lion.
All together?
Yeah, all together. It's a weird, like they describe them. Like if people have tried to draw what these things look like, and it's, I mean, artists, right? You're going off a description. There's some weird, 6 wings, these wheels with jewels on them.
Is that figure? Or
I think it's more literal. I mean, they describe it like this is what I saw. Well, because you think about it, it's like I tell people like, you end up in Avatar, describe the people, and people try and describe it, right? But if it's like if we've never seen Avatar, I didn't pick something with weird people. Describe what the aliens look like, and people are like, well, they're really tall, and they got this kind of cat nose.
What are they called?
Huh?
What are they called?
There's cherubim and seraphim.
What the?
Yeah, you can Google and see what you find.
Mexican description. The blooms every time he's mad.
So anyway, numbers. Here's where now we're going to get into some cool stuff. I'm going to try and move a little quicker. I keep saying that. But either way, surrounding the throne of God, you've got the ox, the man, the lion, the eagle, the cherubim, ox, man, lion, eagle. It's just interesting. It all falls out this way. So numbers. Yep, they number. So basically, the first 5 chapters is them numbering the tribes. Pretty simple. They're just numbering off the tribes, who's in each group. Okay. Chapter 6 is the Nazirite vow. If you guys want to know about Samson, the long hair, couldn't eat grapes, couldn't touch dead things. That's where you can learn about what a Nazirite is. Samuel was a lifelong Nazirite. John the Baptist was believed to be a lifelong Nazirite. Samson, buff guy, knocked over a temple with his eyes poked out. We'll learn about him probably next week, actually, maybe. I think we'll probably get Joshua in Judges. Yeah, so Samson will be next week. But he was a lifelong Nazirite. If you read this, most people took a short-term vow. I think Paul may have taken a Nazirite vow because it talks about when he leaves Corinth in the book of Acts when we were reading, he had to go burn his hair. He said, I cut my hair and I had to go get it burned at the temple as an offering. The Nazirites would shave their head, start your vow, your hair would keep growing until your vow was over. Then you cut your hair again and take that as an offering for the amount of time that you were there. So again, it talks a bunch about offerings, talking about Passovers. I'm like, okay, so now I'll skip over this story. God sent some quail and they're whining. Miriam, Moses' sister, and Aaron started trying to argue that they maybe should be the bosses. God makes Miriam leprous and then he heals her. Now, here's where things get interesting. Chapter 13 of Numbers. They decide it's time to go into Canaan, but they need to spy out the land, okay? We need to know what we're getting ourselves into. So they pick out one guy from each of the 12 tribes to be a spy to go in and check out the land. If you look at the people in chapter 13, it names them all. One of those guys happens to be Joshua, the son of Nun. Must have been like an orphan. He's the son of Nun. Now, there are these people called the Anakim, the sons of Anak. Long story short is two guys, Joshua and Caleb, become really special at this point because they send these spies in, right? And in verse 28, chapter 13, or actually let's go 27. Joshua and Caleb come back. They say in verse 27, they told him, we have went to the land you sent us. It truly flows with milk and honey, and there is fruit. Well, these are the other people, the other Israelites, the other 10. Nevertheless, the people who dwell in the cities are strong. The cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there. So these are the Anakim, the people who are descendants of this guy, Anak, right? Going down, Caleb and Joshua come back. They say, let's go for it. And then in verse 33, it says, there we saw the giants, the descendants of Anakim, came from the giants. And we were like grasshoppers in our own sight. That word in Hebrew, in verse 33, the giants, it's the word Nephilim. We talked about this in Genesis 6. There were giants in the lands in those days and afterwards. If you weren't here for the Genesis story, we're not going to go down that rabbit's hole. But it's crazy stuff. Point being, though, is that here's this reference of there being giants again. That same word Nephilim is here. Long story short, Joshua and Caleb says, God's with us. Let's go. Everyone else says, we see giants. Let's not go. This is actually applicable to us because this is like life, guys. You're going to see giants in life. You're going to see hard obstacles in life. If you have a Joshua and Caleb mentality, well, if God's with us, what can stop us? If God is for us, who can be against us? If you're really doing something God wants you to do, there's just nothing that can stop you. There's no way you can be stopped. It doesn't matter what kind of giants there are. There can be giants with lasers and robots and sharks with laser beams attached to their heads, right? Yeah, nothing can stop you. So the people start complaining in chapter 14. In verse 11, then the Lord said to Moses, how long will these people reject me? How long will they not believe me? With all the signs which I performed among them. People, well, if God would just do something, if he would just show me a sign, why doesn't God do this? Why doesn't God do that? If he did that, then I'd believe. We've talked about it. This is not a story. This is his story. This is how real life happened. God, through plagues at Egypt, he parted the Red Sea. I just want to know what the Shekinah glory, which is the fancy theological term for the pillar of fire, looked like. How tall was it? Did it go all the way to the sky until you couldn't see it no more? How wide was it? Was this like 10 feet wide, or is this like a city block wide? There was a pillar of fire that led them through the wilderness. And then they see some big dudes, and they're like, we give up on God. Moses left them for 40 days on the mountain. They're like, why don't we make a golden cow and worship it instead? It just shows that God could do miracles. People's hearts are people's hearts. People's are going to be for God, or they're going to be against God. They're going to be believing in God, or they're going to doubt God. God doing a miracle is not going to just radically change someone. Doesn't mean life's going to be easy. But the nice thing is in verse 18, the Lord spoke, saying, the Lord is long-suffering and abundant in mercy, forgiving iniquity and transgression. Okay? So, he says, I'm long-suffering. I'm going to deal with this, but he does say, you guys have rejected me too many times. This is where the Lord basically says, this group, he actually said, I'm just going to wipe them all out, Moses. Moses is like, no, don't do it, God. He's like, come on, Moses. I can make people again. Did it once. I'll do it again. He's like, don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it. You've been so good to them. And like Moses starts pleading with God. And you'll see sometimes I think God plays with us. Like you see him in Moses where he like makes Moses fight for the people. And God's like, okay, you got it this time, Mo, but next time. And so here's the deal. In verse 29, the carcasses of you who have complained against me shall fall in this wilderness. All of you who are numbered, book of Numbers, according to your entire number, from 20 years old and above. That means anyone 19 or younger did not die. This is the text I turn to for the age of accountability. This is very hopeful too, and I think it would be very hopeful to say this, but people ask, what if a baby dies? It wasn't old enough to decide that it wants to give its life to Jesus. Well, the Bible does tell stories of babies dying, infants, and them going to heaven. Happens to one of David's babies. And I've heard the argument, it's always the believers we hear these stories. So you can't make the same argument, but I think God, it's just this thing. We have to go off who's God's character. Is God going to judge a baby who could never make a decision for itself? What about a 5-year-old? What about a 10-year-old? If you've worked with as many teenagers as I have, you know how big idiots they are.
Mm-hmm.
They can't make a decision for themselves.
That's true.
And that's the thing, though, is that I don't know how to pin it on an age, right? But I will say this, because when people ask, well, how old then? What is the age where God starts holding people accountable for their actions? And I go, you know what? I can't tell you this is the age. What I can tell you, though, is once upon a time, there was a bunch of people in Israel who decided to complain that there was giants in the land. And God says, you know what? Because of your lack of faith, you're not going to see the land. He doesn't condemn them to hell. He just says they don't get to go to the promised land. You're going to die here in the wilderness. You guys are going to stay here until you die of natural causes. But anyone 19 and younger, I'm not going to hold them accountable for your guys' actions. They didn't know any better. Back then, 19-year-olds were married. But still, they weren't numbered. So, that said, they're now going to stay in the wilderness for 40 years. So while they're in the 40 years, there's a big rebellion in chapter 16 where this guy Korah thinks that, I think we should be, why Moses, why are you the only guy who can talk to God? I think we all should be able to talk to God. And so, long story short, God tells them, well, why don't you try this? Let's offer some fire, like make some incense, burn it for God. Let's see what happens, right? So Korah and all his people make incense. Moses and Aaron's people make incense. Korah's people's incense, the fire comes out and consumes them. I taught them a lesson. And then the earth opened up and swallowed like everyone in Korah's family. Settle that deal real quick. Then, which is kind of cool in chapter 17, he said, how about this? Let's just make it settled. Who is God's priest? Everyone pick the leader from your tribe. Get your rods that you guys walk with and write your names on it. From the tribe of Levi, you're going to get Aaron, Moses' brother. Write your names on the rods. Stick them by the tabernacle and then come back in the morning. Well, it says in chapter 17, verse 7, Moses placed the rods before the Lord in the tabernacle of witness. Now it came to pass the next day that Moses went to the tabernacle of witness, and behold, the rod of Aaron of the house of Levi had sprouted and put forth buds and produced blossoms and yielded ripe almonds. So his rod actually like grew leaves again and had ripe, like ready to eat almonds on it, because it was an almond branch was his rod. So it's an interesting story. There are 3 things found inside the Ark of the Covenant, the big golden box that Indiana Jones goes after. The 10 Commandments, the stones, some manna, the funky stuff that showed up every day that they ate, and the rod of Aaron. That's what's inside the Ark. So,
is there still descendants from like those tribes?
The Jews.
But, like,
none of them know who they are anymore. That's one thing, is none of them can claim they know who they are. Though there is some DNA studies nowadays that they can kind of trace some things back to try and pinpoint, but they're all intermixed now. So you're like, oh, I'm like 10% Levi, and I'm like 15% Reuben, and I'm like, 8% Gad, and I'm like 18% Dan, and I'm
Damn.
it's one of the tribes. 30% Judah. So, continually going on this sacrificing of stuff. Now, here's the big one. The people start complaining in chapter 20 again. Bum, bum, bum. So, verse 4. Chapter 20, verse 4. The people complain. Complaining for me, Josu. See? He's not even obeying, just like the Israelites. So, they say, why have you brought us up from the assembly of the Lord into this wilderness that we and our animals should die here? They're always complaining. They ran out of water. Remember they cracked, though he hit the rock burst forth. I actually was a little upset that in Judah's little kid's book, they do so many things right in those books that they don't do in other books. Like the Noah's Ark, they had like a little dinosaur popping out of his egg on the ark. I think it's so cute. It shows people dying and drowning, like begging for mercy. It's great. I love it. Like that's the way kids' books should be. When David kills Goliath, it shows him chopping off his head. Like they don't show that in most kids' books. Part of the story. Kids gotta learn. So, but it showed the 10 Commandments, and it had them like with this rock and this like fountain coming out like a garden hose. I'm like, no, it was feeding 1 million people. This thing burst open. It made like a lake that people lived off of for quite a long time. The lake's running dry. Verse 5, why have you made us come out of Egypt to bring us to this evil place? It's sandy. We don't like it. There's not a place of grain or figs or vines or pomegranates, nor is there any water to drink. So he goes back to God. Verse 7, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, take the rod, you and your brother Aaron, gather the congregation together, speak to the rock before their eyes, and it will yield its water. Verse 10, Moses tells the people, hear now, you rebels, must we bring water from you for out of this rock? Moses lifted his hand and struck the rock twice with his rod. Verse 12, the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, because you did not believe me and hallow me in the eyes of the children of Israel, therefore you shall not bring the assembly into the land which I have given them. Moses lost his ticket to the promised land. His whole life has been around getting Israel out of Egypt and into the promised land. And here he doesn't get it. Why? He misrepresented God. I heard an interesting take on the third commandment. What's the third commandment? I know it's tough. I just like asking these tough questions. Savannah, you're the lifelong learner here. Come on now.
I'm good, I think.
Huh?
I'm take a guess. Has to do with something that has to do with God, like.
Good God, that's good.
Is it make the Lord's Day holy?
It's 4.
My foot cramps.
What would 3 be then?
Don't use the name in vain.
What is it?
Here's the actual wording.
Doesn't
Do not
name his name.
take the Lord's name in vain. Anthony, your faith, what are you?
What do you mean?
What do we call you because of your faith?
Christian?
A Christian. What's that mean? Literally.
Mini
Christian.
Christ.
Huh?
Mini Christ.
It's a small Christ. Here's an interesting take on that. Throw the whole idea of cursing out the window. And I'm not saying that's not what it's saying per se, maybe, but this is something we're thinking about. The whole idea that taking the Lord's name in vain means blasphemy and cursing, throw that out the window for a second. when you take the Lord's name and start calling yourself a little Christ, don't do it in vain. Don't start calling yourself a follower of God, a follower of Christ, and misrepresent God, because God takes it super seriously. Moses gets kicked out of the promised land because God had a plan. And for those who weren't here last week, his plan was, Moses, I want you to strike the rock. It's going to burst forth and bring forth this water. But here in part 2, just speak to the rock, and it's going to bring forth the water. Paul tells us that the rock was Christ. It's symbolic of Jesus, that he was struck and brought forth living water, but only struck one time. He never had to be struck again. He died once and for all. Interesting story. Speaking of Christ's death and resurrection, chapter 21, the people start complaining again. These Israelites are good at this. I mean, if you've got something you're good at, you might as well stick with it. Verse 5 of chapter 21, the people spoke against God and Moses. Why have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? There is no food. So in verse 6, God did what any proud, good, loving father would do. He sent fiery serpents among the people, and they bit the people, and many of them died. Good answer, right? Tell me you wouldn't do that if you could, right? Like, and you're like, whatever, math class. There's like the whiners. I hate math. Math is snake. He dies. Serves him right. Like, anyone else want to complain? Okay, so therefore the people came to Moses and said, we have sinned, for we have spoken against the Lord and against you. Pray to the Lord that he would take away the serpents from us. So Moses prayed for the people. Verse 8, then the Lord said to Moses, make a fiery serpent and set it on a pole, and that it shall be that everyone who is bitten, when he looks at it, shall live. So Moses made a bronze serpent and put it on a pole. And so it was if the serpent had bitten anyone, when they look at the bronze serpent, they lived. End of story.
How big was the serpent?
10 feet.
Well, here's the stupid, it's just a little puddle. I didn't think it was a very good rock, right? But check this out. Take a look at the serpent. Now, this is probably a pretty good drawing. They actually had to hide and destroy this serpent because people started worshiping it later in the Bible. They actually went and found the old bronze serpent. Everyone started worshiping it. Remember that thing? It used to save our lives. What's it hanging on? Makes sense though, right? Like putting a serpent on a pole, you probably have something for the serpent to wrap around. Here's an interesting thought. One, Virginia Mason Medical. Forever since then, a serpent on a spear on a pole. It's a sign of it's a universal medical symbol, still used today. You'll see hospitals with the serpent on the cross. Here's a thought. Anyone want to guess what a snake is symbolic of in the Bible?
The devil.
Devil. Let's add one more thing to that. Probably tied in with the devil. Sin. Sin of the devil, right? Bronze. It's made of bronze. I mentioned how the tabernacles, everything had meaning, right? Well, the altar where the sacrifices went, it was bronze. And fire, it's a fiery serpent. And a bronze altar. Bronze in the Bible, anywhere you see bronze, has symbolism of judgment. Gold is holiness, kingliness, or godliness. Silver is purity. Remember, every metal has a symbolism in the Bible. All that's saying judgment, right? So sin and Satan, judgment, it's all up on the cross. And all you have to do is look to that and you'd live. That was how simple it was. You look to the cross where sin and judgment is up on there, dying for us. Just look to it. That's all you have to do. There's reference elsewhere that people still died. Because that's also like today, right? Where God could set up heaven, salvation, simply for anyone who wants it. It's just that simple. Just look to the cross. Done. Yet people would get bit and they'd still not look. Crazy. That people would just, even though they're dying of that, they still wouldn't look. But that's kind of cool. There's all this symbolism in the Old Testament. It's cool, cool stuff. And it just testifies where, as Augustine put it best, the Old Testament is Jesus concealed, but the New Testament is Christ revealed. You know, all this stuff is just pointing to Jesus, pointing to the cross. And Jesus himself in John, I bet you my Bible might have a reference. Maybe not. Cheap Bible. It's John 12. As the serpent in the wilderness was raised up, so I must also be raised up. And when I am raised up, I will draw all men unto me. So, I think it's John 12. Now you can check it. All right. Okay.
Yes,
Maybe it's 6. Maybe it's
14.
14? Okay. I think the I will draw all men unto me is in chapter 12, but the other part is similar. So there's a cool story I don't want to spend much time on tonight because we're hitting close to our time, really finishing Numbers, and I was supposed to be finishing the next book. But there's a story of Balaam. Interesting character. They speak about him in the New Testament. He's weird because he can talk to God. He's a prophet. He speaks forth, but he also does bad things. I don't know if he's in heaven. Kind of don't think he is. Yet he can still talk to God. Weird. Victor? I'll take raise your hand. One of my most encouraging verses in the Bible, though, is in chapter 22, verse 28.
Verse 28?
Yeah, verse 28. Here, wait 1 second. You should read out of this one. Okay, 1 second. Wait for it, Anthony. You waiting?
Let's gonna use the other word for donkey.
I didn't say that.
That's what you want to use that word.
Hey, right there. Read for the group. There you go. Verse 28.
Hey. And the Lord opened the mouth of the
Okay, you won't say it.
donkey.
Been trained well. Of the donkey. Okay, it says a bad word because it's Old English. Anyway, here's why this is inspirational. Because if God will speak through a, you know what, he can speak through anyone.
That's really good.
But no joke. Here's a funny thing. Balaam's now like, he keeps saying, I can't curse, because this guy hires the prophet to curse Israel. Because he knows, like, he's a powerful prophet. Let's get him. Go curse these Israelites. He's like, I can't do it. God told me not to. I can only do what God says. I can't do it. I can't do it. More money. Okay, fine, I'll go. So he's writing, and there's an angel there with a big sword ready to lop off his head. He can't see the angel, invisible, but the donkey sees it. So the donkey keeps, like, trying to turn, and he keeps whacking the donkey with his staff. The donkey's like, I'm not going. Keeps whacking the donkey. So verse 20, then the Lord opened the mouth of the donkey, and she said to Balaam, what have I done to you that you have struck me these 3 times? And Balaam said to the donkey, because you have abused me. I wish that there was a sword in my hand, for I would kill you. So the donkey said to Balaam, am I not your donkey on which you have ridden? Ever since I became yours to this day, was I ever disposed to do this to you? And he said, no. Then the Lord opened the eyes of Balaam so he could see the angel. At what point did Balaam ever question that he was talking to his donkey? Like, if this was Shrek, it'd be a different story. But this is like real life. He's talking to his donkey, not thinking twice about it.
He was just acting normal about
I
it.
know. Anyway, it's a big joke, though, right? God can speak through a donkey. He can speak through Anthony. Done deal.
It's all over now.
It's all ogre now.
You never seen it?
No.
You don't want it.
Please don't.
No.
All right.
Ever.
So, story of Balaam's over. There's a cool story where people in chapter 25 start, like, basically marrying into the other tribes, like the natives, the pagans, the bad people. They start hooking, and that's what he does. Balaam actually tells the guy, listen, I can't curse them because I'm a prophet of God, but if you give me the money, I'll tell you what you can do. Tells them, go get all the hot Midianite chicks, come on down, seduce the men, and once they start going for those girls, then they'll start giving up all what they believe in. And that's what started happening. There's a cool story.
Where is it? I love this thing. Phineas, verse 7 of chapter 25. When Phineas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, saw it, he rose from among the congregation and took his javelin in his hand. And he went after the man of Israel into the tent and thrust both him, the man of Israel, and the woman through her body. And so the plague was stopped. Basically, it was like they were like people were like at the tabernacle, like praying, like, stop our sons from going and hooking up with these evil chicks. The Cholitas from the towns down the road, they're horrible and bad influences on them. And some guy like comes walking by the tabernacle with his girl, like kind of laughing about it. So the one dude gets his javelin, and they go into their tent, and somehow he gets both of them at the same time. You can figure that math out on your own. And on the shish kebab, done deal. See, I wish we could do this in public schools today, because you notice that like Israel always would shape up after you just kill a few people, break a couple of arms, whatever. It's like a few fiery serpents. People are all listening all of a sudden. Nowadays, it's not PC, yada, yada, yada. Long story short, lots of laws. Cities of refuge is kind of cool. There was a city of refuge where if you killed someone and you were going to get the death penalty, you could actually go to this like city of refuge and live there and not die. You just could never leave the city. You'd choose a life of exile. It was particularly meant for people who did it on accident, but anywho. But you still were going to get the crime. Deuteronomy. So Deuteronomy, I'm not going to go through everything in Deuteronomy because it is Leviticus told over again. But we cannot go through all this without going to Deuteronomy 6. A lot of good stuff I have highlighted in here. What's this? Ooh, Oprah. Deuteronomy 4, chapter 24. Oprah left the Christian faith and now runs one of the largest churches in America. I honestly think like Oprah is followed like a religion. It's ridiculous. Like the people who follow Oprah, I mean, it's religious. I'm not saying you can't like Oprah. I'm just saying there are people who like, they treat her like scripture. People really follow Oprah. And Oprah is really into like Eastern mysticism and like kind of spiritualism, just kind of like, you know, there's spiritual. I'm not really religious. I'm more spiritual. It means you don't have a clue what you do with your life. Just what it means. You make up whatever feels good to you. That's another way of putting it. All that said, and honestly, if anyone ever gives you that, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual thing, it really just means they just don't have a clue what they're talking about. I'm just more spiritual. I'm sorry if I didn't say that. And the idea is, though, is like, really, we've had the talk, right? There either is a God or there isn't. But if there is a God, creator God, maker of the heavens and the earth, he made everything. He rules everything. The real question should not be what I think about him. It should be, who is he for real? I need to know who this guy really is, not just my feelings about God. Okay, if there's a guy who made everything, your feelings mean nothing. I mean, it's just a fact. My opinion means nothing. The best thing I can do in life is try and relay what he has said and make it understandable to other people, rather than trying to give you my opinions on him. On how, well, my God would be more like this. My God would look a little bit like this guy. He would look like Anthony, but he'd be as tall as Josue. And my God would, huh?
Be a good looking guy.
What?
Yeah. So, all that said, Oprah left the faith over Deuteronomy 4:24. For the Lord your God is a consuming fire, a jealous God. Might actually been that verse, but she heard a preacher talk about God being a jealous God, and she totally got it wrong. And now she leads millions astray because she got confused. Your Lord God is jealous. She took it as jealous about, like she's jealous over Victor, like jealous of Victor. And she was like, if this God in the Bible is jealous of me, then he's no God worth worshiping, because God, why would he be jealous of what I am or what I have?
Said Oprah said that?
Yes. This is why she left Christianity. What? She was raised in a church, and she's like, the God of the Bible, if he's jealous of me, then that's obviously, and then she said this when she was really young, like before she was Oprah, you know. The point is this, though. God is a jealous God. He is not jealous of you. God is extremely jealous for you. If you've ever had a boyfriend or a girlfriend and you ever thought they might be cheating on you, that is how God feels when we're off doing our thing. Or if you have a person who might someday become your boyfriend or girlfriend and you find out that they're cheating on you, that's how God feels. That's the idea. He's jealous for you. It's not that he's jealous of what Maritza has, of what Victor has, of what Anna has. No, he's jealous for her. Like, no, I want you. I want you to me. I want you and me to have a great relationship. God wants personally to know you. He knows you. He wants you to know him. He wants to have you in a two-way street. That's what he's jealous for. He's jealous of when we're off doing all these other things, being pulled away. Talks about how God will spread them out. Give me 1 second.
Read verse 4.
Verse 4. Sorry, let's go back.
6.
What?
You need to read verse 4.
Which chapter 4?
6. Chapter 6.
Chapter 6. Oh, I'm getting there. That's the Shema. We're going to come back to that. So I'm just going to go and see real quick. People aren't supposed to take bribes, love God, walk in his commandments. I will say this, guys. Oh, here's one, guys. Deuteronomy, although I'm not going to quote most of it, even though this one has a lot more highlighted than Leviticus, this is the most quoted book by Jesus. He quoted Deuteronomy more than Isaiah, more than Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers. Okay? There's tons of amazing stuff in here, but a lot of it is the law. But a lot of it is just a really simple, just simple stuff. Talks about how there's going to be a prophet like Moses. That's concerning Jesus. Talks about just different types of offerings, how God wants to take care of the widows. There's God's welfare system is built in here. Talking about how, like, farmers, they're only supposed to take this much of their crop and leave the rest for the poor people. Why? Because in Acts it says if you don't work, you don't eat. Good welfare system. The idea is there was always provision for everyone to eat. No one would go hungry because there was provision for people to always be able to go out and get food. People always had a way to go out and get food for themselves, but it wasn't just given to them. That's the Acts. If they don't work, they don't eat. So, choices of life and choices of death. Songs of Moses, it closes off. I will say in Deuteronomy 11:26. I'm actually going to go backwards. I always flip to the end of the book. There's some cool stuff to talk about. For sake of time, I'm not going to go over it all. But I will give you two things to go before we go back to the Shema. 11:26. Behold, I set before you today a blessing and a curse. The blessing, if you obey the commandments of the Lord your God, which I command you today. And the curse, if you do not obey the commandments of the Lord your God, but turn aside from the way which I command you today, to go after other gods which you have not known. He's just basically saying, you guys have the option always to follow me and be blessed, or to go the other direction and just live with life. Closing on Deuteronomy 6. So chapter 6. Have your highlighters and pens at the ready. Anthony's Bible is a little bit more sacred and holy than the rest of ours, so he can't write.
I already highlighted it. Look.
Why? What's up with it?
He's just highlighting. Here we go. I can do verse 4 in Hebrew. I'm working on verse 5. I haven't memorized it yet. You guys want to hear the Hebrew? I got that down. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. I'm working on it. I got to work on verse 5 now. I was doing a YouTube lesson the other day. My mom taught me verse 4. She speaks a good amount of Hebrew. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. That word one, echad, it means united. The word implies more than one united. Verse 5, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all of your strength. And your heart is very symbolic of your spirit. And your strength is very symbolic of your flesh, your body. We are a triune people who worship a triune God. People have a hard time understanding the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, but we are triune people. We have a body, we have a soul, and we have a spirit. And they are different. The differences between soul and spirit can be a bit confusing at times, but it's a fun study for another time. But here he's saying, man, your whole body, soul, and spirit, worship God. Love him with every part you've got. And these words which I command you today shall be in your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children. This is what families should be doing. It says you shall talk about them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up. You shall bind them as a sign in your hand. They shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. Here I've got, I knew I'd have it nearby. This is a small one for a car. It's called a mezuzah. The Shema, Deuteronomy 6, is inside of this little tiny box. Inside of this one too. Got the Hebrew all written over it. The Jews were very literal, I told you. When they say camp to the south, they camped straight south. They didn't just kind of scatter out. It would be like a straight line from that tabernacle straight on out. When it says, you shall write them on your doorposts, your house, and on your gates, these are supposed to get put onto your doorposts. My mom gives them to me all the time.
They always put those on the Sabbath day. Don't they use those for Sabbath?
Well, these ones, they go on your house. A lot of people kiss them as they go in and out of their house. This is a Jewish thing, right? My mom, I've told in the past a little bit, my mom actually wanted to convert to Judaism when she was younger. And so she speaks some Hebrew. She lived in Jerusalem for a while. And so she knows a lot about Jewish stuff. I have a yarmulke around here somewhere. I need to find it before I go to Israel. If you want to go to the wall, men, you have to wear a head covering. So if you own a yarmulke, wear your little Jewish yarmulke. My mom got me one. I have a yarmulke somewhere. Nicole get mad. I used to wear it around like all day long. She's like, stop that. It looks weird. I know. It's like the opposite of the monk do, where you shave right there. It's my cover right there where it's already shaven. But anyway, this is what they did. They were very literal about some of this stuff. What's interesting in verse 8, you shall bind them as a sign in your hand. They shall be as frontlets between your eyes. Jesus, he gets mad at the Pharisees talking about how they get these gigantic phylacteries to show off how spiritual they are. The phylactery was a wooden box that they would strap with leather to their wrist and to your forehead. And they would stick these verses inside the little box. And if you're Jewish, they don't make the non-Jews do this, but if you're Jewish and you get to go to the exclusive Jewish section of the wall in Jerusalem, you have to bind the phylactery to your hand, you have to bind it to your head, because they're following the law that they're supposed to bind it to them. What's interesting is when they translated the Old Testament into Greek, a couple hundred years before Christ, the Septuagint, they retranslated the as frontlets between your eyes, so they would have made a box and put it there. It says it should be removable before your eyes. The idea is that God's law, not rules, but the heart of God, his general desire for mankind, it's bound to our hands. Everywhere our hands go, which is everything we do, it's got God working through us. Our eyes, everywhere we look, where we set our eyes and where we go, we've got God's law in mind. Imagine if families had parents who taught this stuff diligently to your children. When you went in your house, when you sat down, when you walked, when you lied down, when you rose up, this was what was on the mouth of the people. That on those Sabbath days, those Sabbath years, families were together talking about this kind of stuff. It's impactful, and it makes a big difference on families. And I bring all this up because you guys are the children in families right now. And someday, though, you'll have your own families. Makes a big difference when you have that active family influence of things. I was raised going to church, but I didn't have any church life at home. Church was Sundays and Sundays only. And it wasn't like we were like weird, like my parents were involved at the church. My dad served in different things, but still, it was a Sunday only kind of thing. And I knew some Bible stories from at home. But, you know, it was definitely, it wasn't until later in life that, like, I started really learning the Bible and what God's will for my life was. And where it started making some radical changes in who I was. But the Shema, I love this section of text. I've taught multiple sermons focusing on this text, whether for a part of the sermon or the whole sermon itself. You know, but the big thing is just party's over. We're closing that in the Shema. So for what it's worth, there's a movie, Kingdom of Heaven. I think Orlando Bloom, he dies, I think. Point being, at the end when he dies, Jews will quote this verse daily, and when they die, that's supposed to be their last words, the Shema. And it's called the Shema because the "Hear, O Israel" is Shema Yisrael, so they call it just the Shema is the term that any Israeli knows what you're talking about. Any Jewish person, well, any Jewish person who's actually Jewish, kind of like people who are Christian in America because you're from America, so you're a Christian.
Mhm.
Which, maybe we'll go back and close on that for tonight. We were talking about how Moses misrepresented God. 10 Commandments from last week. An interesting, but I think important alternative interpretation of commandment number 3. I don't know if you've heard this one before. We were talking about that do not take the Lord's name in vain. Not meaning blasphemy, but the idea is you are a Christian. You are a Christian. You are a small Jesus. You're supposed to be representing Christ. Don't do it in vain. Don't misrepresent God. And just thinking about that it's our jobs to represent things. And it looks very bad when we do a bad job of representing ourselves. Jimmy's back. I know. Amen.
Amen.
Stop laughing at me. Get up, I gotta sit down. Dude,
What? So he's still lighter than you.
he lost weight, so he had competition. I thought you guys were laughing at something else. Okay, never mind.
I love Joseph. All right.
I thought you guys were laughing at my alpacas.
Yeah.
No. Now that you mention them, is that made out of alpaca?
No, I skinned all the cats in the neighborhood.
That's to raise the value of your 13 cats, make them more
My
rare.
cats are too valuable. They're all on the endangered species list. Okay, are we done? Like, is the study done?
Yeah, I was giving my closing thoughts.
Okay, all right. I'm sorry, I interrupted.
No, it's
My
okay.
apologies. This thing's like really hot.
So thoughts from tonight. Thoughts from tonight. Roger, favorite fact of the night.
The last thing.
What's the last thing?
Here we go.
You like the Shema?
Yeah.
Jesus asked that one guy from when he was doing the Sermon on the Mount. Yes, I remember.
What's he asking?
What's like the main commandment?
What's the greatest commandment? And he says it's all right there. Like, because you think about this, right? Jesus says there's 2 commandments for us to follow. And they really are simple. Like, this is where you find out about Christianity. It's not about a bunch of rules. Just love God. And then he says to love others. But realistically, that goes under the first commandment, right? Mm-hmm. Realistically. It would be hard for me to believe that you guys have authentic love for me if you abused my children. I mean, if you guys showed hatred and abuse towards Jubilee, you guys would think Judah, right? But I'm not even Jubilee, the innocent one.
Over your dog.
That's not my child.
It's just like you.
Oh, I love the dog. She's a great animal.
She's a beast.
So, no, but realistically though, right? Like, if someone abused your kids, I would question their actual respect and how they feel about you. So when God says, love me and love my children, love everyone else, well, I think it kind of falls underneath that first one. But you're right. Yeah, what is the greatest commandment? Love with God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength is the New Testament. Throw El Noggin in there.
Oh.
Yeah, it's
Oh yeah. I think you meant eggnog.
He's like,
Yeah, yeah. You're eggnogging.
What?
In the old eggnoggin. Right. Maritza,
Yeah.
thoughts?
Um.
Highlights?
Yeah. So right here in chapter 3, when you mentioned verse 4, how like the heart would represent the spirit and the strength of his flesh, that kind of like stood out to me. Kind of made notes on that.
Everyone remembers the Shema because it was the most recent thing. Who remembers anything from the book of Numbers? Hey, what about, so we had the fiery serpent. You don't know Numbers.
Talks about
Moses
the
not going to
judgment
the
of the
promised
kids.
Yeah, he lost.
Moses misrepresenting God and not going to the promised land. We had the fiery serpent.
I like the when like he said that everybody would die, but after the age of 19.
You like
I like
that.
We did a picture of the layout of the tribes.
Because it shows like.
Pretty cool.
The feast and how they're all made on.
Oh, Cameron, I like it because it
So
shows,
yeah,
like,
what was the significance, guys, of
God.
the flags of the animals or whatever that represent the tribes? That.
That
was great.
You like that?
Yeah.
So we talked about how we have Dan led this group, Reuben led that group, Ephraim led that group, Judah led that group. Well, Judah is represented by a lion, Reuben by a man, Ephraim by an ox, and Dan is by an eagle. Here is God in the middle, and he's surrounded by the eagle, lion, man, and ox, which are the four faces of the cherubim. Just, yeah, the crazy little things. Like I said, that's the thing I love about the Bible.
Little, that's intense.
I know. That's what I mean. It's like I commented on Facebook where Sherva made that funny post back. Sherva added this picture. It was like he got it from somewhere. It was like a bookstore. There's a Bible with a plastic wrap, and it says a signed copy. There's a little. I'm a little skeptical. That's funny. Anyway,
Karen did not find that amusing at all.
he gets it.
Oh.
It's corny, but it is like I commented on Facebook because I was like, it is. As I study for this stuff, like it's like, man, like the deeper I dig, the deeper I dig.
You always say that.
I know, I do say that. Oh, it's that part of the night where I start losing my voice. It's like, it's crazy. I actually joked about how, like, I made a post on Facebook, and my pastor's like, exactly, and actually a couple pastors, Billy commented too, how it's like, I need to quit studying, because the more I study, the more I find. The more I find, it's like, well, today we're going to cover like 2 verses, because I kept studying those 2 verses and kept finding more things. And it's like that. And I liked how when we first started John 1 year ago, I commented that some scholars made the comment in the book of John, it's shallow enough that children can wade in it, but it's deep enough that elephants can swim in it. It was a concept that like a little kid can read the Gospel of John and understand the main idea of what's going on about Jesus, about who he is, what he's trying to accomplish, where he goes, and who he touches. Yet super intellectual people who are really trying, they can dig, and just find deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper things. Who wants to share with Cameron the whole the numbers thing with Leviticus 23, the appointed times? Does anyone remember any of that?
I wrote it
A
down.
lot of numbers.
There
The
were 5. So
Yeah, the words. The equal distance letter sequence code.
So every
49.
49 letters,
That was the Torah one.
21.
This one's 70.
It's Torah.
It's 2.
Torah, and then there's the Japanese get bombed.
Torah.
Okay, yeah.
And all these from the Word of God.
That was the other one. We're talking about just kind of a cool fact. So we're talking about the appointed times in Israel, the feasts. How many were there? How many days are appointed? 70. And so we talk about how like the study of the equal distance letter sequences were like every 10th letter, every 9th letter, they try and find words, numerology stuff, this kind of stuff. And basically it said in the book of Genesis, there's 78,064 letters, individual letters. So that said, appointed times, that phrase, whether you do it 2-letter jumps, 3-letter jumps, 4-letter jumps, 5-letter jumps, if you tried every different sequence, it should appear at least 5 times now, statistically, in the book of Genesis. But it only appears once. And it appears starting in Genesis 1:14 at a jump of 70. There's 70 appointed times. And Genesis 1:14 is the verse where God says he put the stars in the heaven and everything for the days and the seasons and the appointed times. So it's just kind of a cool little like how that falls under that one place. But lots of cool little nerdy things. The nerdy stuff's always fun.
I know Roger was saying something.
Oh, it was about that he killed everyone, or like he said that everyone was gonna die over the age of 19.
Oh yeah, that.
Oh, I thought that was interesting because like he always gives everyone second chances or whatever, but this time he was just like.
Oh, he did give him a lot of chances.
I know that's why but he was just done with them. Like
Yeah.
that was like their lot, and it showed that everybody did die,
Mm-hmm.
but of natural causes.
I literally just read on that promise at the beginning of Numbers this morning, because in Numbers 13 you have these 12 homies go up in there. Hey, let's check out this land.
Yeah.
10 come back and they bring back like crappy report. 2 homies are like, yo, it's good to go. And they go with the bad report, okay? And then God out of that is like all these homies are they're gone. So those 10 get wiped out and everyone older than the age, I thought it was 20.
Yeah, 20 and older.
So
I'm 19.
okay, yeah, so same except for Caleb and Joshua are all gonna die off. And so I literally just read on that like this morning.
Mm-hmm.
But I haven't gotten to the fulfillment of it, just like the promise out of 13:14. But interestingly enough, if you look at it, you can apply this to football, to school, to politics, to home, to church, to theology, to college, all over the place. In Numbers 13, you have these 10 guys that go up there, and then they run in fear. They run away. They see big boys, and they're like super scared. They go up to offensive linemen for Ellensburg, and they crap their pants, and they run away. And they're like, ah! Or you have like Felix Medina goes in there, a little undersized, decides he's going to drop kick them, and just goes for it. So like, or it could be, or Roger Renteria, but you're bigger now, or whatever. Just going in and seeing a big challenge or a big project or a big whatever, spiritual or physical or whatever, and that's cool. So speaking of famous, going in there and then you either run back and you have your tail between your legs and you just get too scared so you run away in fear, or you go forth and conquer it and you take on the challenge and you just spearhead through. So anyway, now I'm to where you just said. That's where I'll be at tomorrow.
Where were you talking?
Next time you should like a chess
You missed the
analogy
tackle when I had to go against this big old guy. I was like half the size, but I got the tackle.
No, you can use Josue's method. Just put him in a headlock.
But Josu just sits on you.
Oh man, the fat joke's already coming. Come on, Cameron.
I would have beat him, and he sat.
Oh, I remember that.
That sucks.
That was a question. In Leviticus 18, when it talks about the law of sexual immorality, was everything okay before then?
So hot this house.
No.
Because
I mean, that's one thing too, is the giving of the law was just where he like, now let's write this all down and make this stuff official. Right? So that's a big part, is that it's just kind of going through it. There's a lot of stuff that God already clarified before the law, but this is like, okay, Israel, we're now a new nation.
Yeah, that's what the whole book's about. The new law.
Should have hit my car.
Just throw it.
She got off. She took the
You'll
curve.
absorb it.
I was gonna leave it. So I was like, I don't think I'm on that.
Dude,
that
she was
much.
super reverse.
No,
She
I
gets off. She goes back in. She drives forward. She goes back. I think someone hit it again.
I did not. No.
I'll pay you to teach some lessons.
I'll pay for both the
Uh-uh.
teams.
Them lessons.
Mr. Snapchatting 100 miles an hour. Was that what it was?
I was safe.
we got pulled over. He was going 90 or something. Oh, my foot keeps cramping.
That. You did not take my hashtag.
I like that.
Your twin.
Every time I see a picture
And
of
your
her
boyfriend.
I was like, I was sick.
You trying to put games in
Remember when we got pulled over? I was going to my house.
Yeah, I
I was
need
like,
to
He's like, I have 2 houses.
hashtag. and then hashtag Silas is handsome. If you Google hashtag Silas is handsome, you'll see so many pictures of Silas.
Silas is
Did you hear me say? What else?
Victor, what I tell you about putting that thing in my face, man?
And on the back it's gonna say, whoa, 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 whoa,
Hey, hey, down. I should be.
Hashtag hold on.
Yes.
Hashtag hold on.
That's possible. I'll get back to you.
Jesus, you're frozen in fire. You're
I
frozen
should
in
pay.
fire.
Aaron, first. See if I can
Yes.
class.
Has it ever made noise before?
I took that.
Yeah, man.
We need back.
Like, you ever heard a bush in the
Yes.
Like,
When the outside making a bunch of noise. Yeah.
He's pushing you down. I was testing him.
Wow.
Can you make it fun of me?
I didn't say, hey, the first thing that, hey,
This is the first time I've ever hit the curb ever.
that's a lie, right? But anyways,
That's a lie.
no, I didn't. He told me,
That's a lie.
hey, he told me not to study. I'll teach you. Well, guess what happens? Early in the morning. Oh, you gotta learn this question.
Well, I had a good
Okay, you're gonna write them down.
I got
Next thing you know, all the questions you showed me, it was not even on test. It was something else. No, I got
You
mad.
should take the practice online test. All the test questions.
No, he told me that. I'm gonna take that practice online. No, don't do this for whims. Okay.
All the
Oh,
questions.
I have to guarantee myself.
Because I have to read a book.
Next thing you know, what's it
I
out?
kept putting it done.
Hey, so-
She said that I skipped it.
You know this question, right? Next thing you know,
Bedtime.
all that's
Actually, it is like
I read it.
only do 15 questions. That's it. That's how you gotta go.
It's like what
Next thing you know, I tell him skipping right there. I was like, all mad at him right there. I was like,
I didn't know you didn't know everything.
I don't know how to drive. That's about it.
You need to know the rules of the.
Victor!
Ah.
Hey, give your brother a hug for me.
Can you do that song that I told you? Or is it only on electric?
I need to go.
I think I can do this song as well.
Alright, so we're going head to head.
Hey, Victor, give Cookie a hug for me.
I love
No, what do you mean, man?
Me
You
too.
brother.
I walked outside when it was sounded like going down. They were so bright. I was like, what the?
Hey, especially the Honda. I said Nissan. How funny.
What's up, man? Just to
Do it.
I do.
It is my
You ain't getting that
favorite
back.
It's like
a rush.
Good luck, man. It's like the size of Texas. What'd you do with your Ford?
Size.
Hey,
Anthony, what'd you do with the
Oh,
Ford?
I say, my
Is
house
it
is
all
all hardwood now. So.
Oh, you got hardwood floors?
Yeah, I was saying,
Oh, there's still some left. I used to like that truck. I like that truck.
I put a parking brake on it.
I remember I had the same Ford as you remember, but mine was two-wheel drive and it was long.
What a
Hey.
pursuit.
I'm making a full car on the frame.
For real?
My neighbor.
That's been like.
Why'd you get Jimmy's frame? That frame's
Jimmy,
good.
doesn't yours need to start?
Mine was free though.
You guys talking about taking my
It's like-
frame? You're like, you're acting like it's all like up there.
No, like buy it off of me.
Yeah.
Just so I sold them a engine for a go-kart and I sold them a lawnmower. They never paid me.
Hey, I'll fix it. Hey, I'll fix it. I'll fix it. Huh? Oh, no. He give you know that it helps you.
Yeah, but the lawnmower was in there for.
The one was always like, you could have put the doom buggy in there, the go-kart, whatever you want to call it.
Oh, you gotta fix your company.
Man, the sun's coming in. Get out of here.
I'll fix the problem.
I know when it is.
Yeah, you picked up pretty pop the brake line, man.
Hey, I'll figure out some problem. Hey,
They're like the only ones that.
Don't pop the brake line, man.
That's what I got.
Hey, how was Claude?
Yeah, you could have clogged it up, popping it, man. You gonna pop him up, you gonna snap up my brake line.
Hey, doesn't yours just need a starter?
A starter, the brake line.
The brake.
And a couple of things.
Hey, your tires.
The tires are fine, man.
What do you mean they're fine? They were flat, weren't they?
Flat.
Well,
You ever build the engine? You ever build carburetor?
that's not 10 grand.
That's junk car right there.
That's $10 grand. Build an engine, it's not that much.
Why not just like not do it?
Why not? Because it's like junky right now, dude. Dude, I remember
You're
I fixed
gonna
one
spend
part
10
and I
grand?
fixed another part and I had to fix another
You're
part.
gonna spend 10 grand on a truck that's worth like 2,500.
It's a project truck. I'm not fixing it right now.
Oh,
Be like,
like,
You're hilarious.
oh, like you're gonna like completely redo it. Oh, okay. I thought you were just like gonna fix it and drive
oh,
it.
no,
Oh,
no,
gosh.
I
See?
get that.
Yeah,
It's a waste
this
of
is
cash.
my. I know. That's what I was thinking. Like, what the
What size were you again, Jimmy?
Man, I'm a size 8. Remember I tried driving your truck one time?
When you killed my
Size
son.
8.
No,
Size
you're
8?
not.
Yeah.
Liar.
No, you're just like,
That's tough. How much? I'm a size 8.
we're not.
Oh,
What's Jimmy's shoe size?
I wear a size 8 shoe, right?
No.
Right? Size what? Size 8?
Oh, but
He is not wearing size 8.
because
No.
Looks like it.
Yeah,
Let
see?
me see.
Looks like it.
That's
That's
size 8.
It's not
Jimmy, you're not a
size
size
8.
8.
This is
That's not a
size
size 8.
It's a size 8.
13.
What size do you wear? Like 11? No, 10 and a half.
And those fun, huh?
They're not.
Dude, those are not. Those won't fit me.
Sticker.
Those are- I think
They're too
And
small.
once you take it off, the other guy takes it.
No.
Good
What
job,
size
sir.
is it?
These are size 8 and a half.
Who was that
Those are
one
not.
time
I
that
don't
came
believe
before?
anything you're
How
telling
big is
me
her
right
dog?
now.
Well, you know what?
Let me look at this.
But the size is
Can I get my card
Man,
back?
have fun with
inside.
What's everything
No,
there?
it must have
That
gone
makes it
inside
fun.
right here.
Yeah.
What did I look
Yeah,
at?
that's what
You're
I'm
so
trying.
liar.
Why is this a Dodge?
I was looking for her.
I know I was gonna put that was already in hands.
Let me see. Okay, well, like, put your
Every
foot on.
time
You don't know?
Like they should be giving you.
No,
shit
I'm
for, like
My dad
50,000
gave
miles.
me
I don't know if
like-
it's 100,000 miles.
No, like, but it's
I'm ready on there.
so fun.
Like what size is it? Probably a size 7. You do not have 100.
No, I wear a size 9 in women. 4 years?
Dude,
Never
never
mind.
say.
This is the size
That's
right
why
now.
4 years. But if it's so hot,
Honestly, this is the size right now. Damn, imagine
Us, brother.
if
Is
it's
this
so
like
hot,
college?
no,
Yeah,
it's not
it
a
is.
size 8,
It's a size- it's a size
man.
eight,
That's
man.
a lie.
It is.
You got him.
got
I know. That's a
And
lie.
You got him like
No,
this.
because
That's okay.
Yeah. You're not.
I wish I was a size 8. You know what?
Yeah.
Wait, Christmas.
I didn't know.
Hey, that reminds me of
Happy
Eric. Nautical tire.
It's because she acts like.
Hey.
Yeah.
Oh, dang, Cameron, you gonna snap something up in there, man. You have a good night too, sir.
I saw a video.
All right, neighbors downstairs, time to pump the jams.
Oh, like this?
Oh, man.
It's like,
That was good.
Man, I always do that low, but it doesn't.